The ongoing grade for Code Geass Season 2 in my anime list is 8.94. If it was me, I would bump it 1 point lower, and here's why. Hello everyone, welcome to the Weeb initiative. I'm your host, the Weeb. This is the show where every other week I'll be talking about anime, manga, and everything in between. This week, following our last episode, I'll be talking about the second season of Code Geass, Lelouch of the Revolution, or Code Geass, Lelouch of the Revolution R2. So before I even start, as the last episode, for alerts, I'll be talking about most of the things that happen in this anime. I will be talking about pretty much everything that happens, so even the twist that comes up later, I will be talking about, because it's not really a twist, but it kind of is, kind of isn't. Anyways, it's kind of better explained, so it isn't really that surprising. Anyways, so that's the alert. I'll be talking just about the second season here. I will probably, with air quotes, probably really be doing the review for Actor the Exiled. It is I think 3-movie kind of ordeal, so 3 hours of animation, because it is a parallel story for the Code Geass universe. I will not, as I talked last week, I will not be talking about the other movies, because they basically retell the story with a few alterations, and frankly, that's a whole alternative universe, because I have been informed by people that actually watched them that some things that happen in this season specifically that really change how things work, they kind of move away from, so I'll be staying on, let's say, canon for that matter. That being said, let's go through the stats. So Code Geass Season 2 came out originally in April 2008 and ended in September 2008 with 25 episodes, and from what I can understand, no OVAs for the anime itself. And with that said, there was the same studio, Sunrise, with the help of Clamp for the character designs and so on and so forth, and that's basically it, same as last time. So what happens in this season, right? So we ended last season with a whole lot of cliffhangers, with Suzaku learning that Lelouch was 0, with Kalin discovering that Lelouch was 0, and they basically end the last episode of the last season basically with who shot first between Suzaku and Lelouch, and basically that's what happened. Nanali being taken hostage by whoever, and so on and so forth. That being said, we start this season with let's say a rehash from the first episode of the series. Basically, Lelouch is living his normal life at the school, and he has all his friends there, except if you watch the last episode, you will notice there's no Nina, there's no Kalin, and most importantly, there's no Nanali to be seen. Add to that the fact that somehow, somewhere, some way, Lelouch now has a little brother called Lolo, or Rolo, depends on the way that you pronounce it, but anyways, and what the hell, right? So it's basically a real rehash. So Lelouch and Lolo go to new tower in the series called the Babel Tower to play chess, waging money against some kind of Yakuza, crime syndicate kind of stuff. They end up kind of winning, but in the midst of that, there's a terrorist attack. And then that's when we get the whole context of what the fuck's happening here. So it's been 1 year since the ending of the last episode of the first season, and later on, this is out of order, but anyways, later on we learn what happened to Lelouch. So the whole thing is kind of pretty simple if you think about it. The whole thing about the first episode is just to give the vibe that is a rehash from the first season, and also to give the message that Lelouch is coming back, and coming back in force. So you may say that after he recovers his memories, because we find out later that the Emperor has Geass, and his Geass is basically memory manipulation. After Lelouch regains his memories through sheer will and everything that happens, he comes back a bit more psychopathic than the last time, and given that the season has this whole kind of vibe to it that is basically, yeah, we're going to have no prisoners in this one. It's pretty, I would say it's not really that much more like bloody than the first one, but there are some specific parts where it gets pretty bad. That being said, so the first episode they go through to play chess and stuff, and then we find out that basically after what they call the Black Revolution, so the day that Lelouch came to Tokyo with all the Black Knights and stuff, and eventually he ditched everyone to go after Nunnally and stuff. They lost the revolution, so they were all imprisoned, especially the first episode specifically. I remember there's this really, it's a passing scene, but I thought it was pretty strong, of having public firing squad for some of the guys in prison, so it's pretty rock and roll in that sense. And it goes to show that somehow they took a whole year to actually kill everyone that was imprisoned. I would think that they wouldn't take so long to actually do something like that, but still. Apparently also Cornelia has not been confirmed dead, but also she is not around anymore, and now the Viceroy is someone outside of the main royal family for some reason. That is to say that he died in the first episode, but still, first, second episode, whatever. And the whole thing kind of goes from there, right? So we eventually see the way more present discrimination against Japanese people, or Levans, how they call them, and it became really more dystopic than the first season actually showed, because now both sides have a lot of blood in their hands, so it kind of became way more out there that the discrimination is really hard. And now that Elfie is dead, the whole thing kind of went through the window. Even then, we get to see that the remains of the Black Knights come after Lelouch, because somehow, somewhere, some way, they find out. And this is the first instance of like stretches that they do in this whole season that I don't approve of, because it doesn't feel right. But somehow the Black Knights have come to the conclusion that by following Lelouch they will find Zero, because they need Zero to actually win the war against the Britannians and stuff. Quick tangent about that, actually. Last time I spoke that Britannia was part US and Europe. I was wrong about that. The EU is a different zone, and we have the Chinese Federation, and then Britannia is actually all encompassing America, so from Alaska down to Canada and US, Mexico, the whole of Central and South America, and so that's Britannia actually. I thought it was different, but still. Tangent over, back to the thing. So somehow, some way, the Black Knights being more or less managed by C2 in the Lelouch's absence, they know that if they find Lelouch, somehow they will find Zero, and after a whole lot of stuff happens, Lelouch regains his memories, becomes Zero again, wins the battle in this Babel Tower, and more or less they kill the Viceroy in the first episode by basically throwing the tower on him. Still, Suzaku appears as an upgraded version of him, and basically we find out also that Lolo, the younger brother of Lelouch, that is actually a plant from the Emperor to keep an eye on him, because there is a ploy in place that if Lelouch regains his memories and becomes Zero again, they would, if not kill him, kill Nunnally and stuff, and basically that's it. And then the whole story begins from there. We also see the return of Villeta. Villeta was the Baron, one of the army officers that she actually had an amnesia at the end of the first season and basically fell in love with Ogi and the whole thing. It's a real side character, all things considered, but she has a bigger place in this season also because it's one of the only really cute things that happen in the whole anime, so I'll let that slide. But anyways, the whole thing is she comes back and they basically rebuild the school as a Baru just to keep an eye on Lelouch, because if he regains his memories, I don't think they actually mention killing him outright. I think they actually do, but it's not only that, but also because this will be stretched a lot throughout the rest of the anime. Anyways, so from then on, we have until I think the third episode, more or less. So the first episode is Lelouch regaining his memories and actually regaining control of the Black Knight, more or less. And now he has to operate in secret because now that he remembers everything that happened, he knows that he cannot show that he regained his memories, otherwise the whole thing will blow over, and he thinks that Nanami will be used as a hostage to keep him down. Not that he's wrong, but still. And from then on, he finds really weird ways to kind of keep everybody in check and not really seem like Zero, but somehow, someway, he has still to rescue everybody that has been imprisoned and is now going to be executed. Because at the end of the whole thing in the Babel Tower, he actually gets to be a refugee inside of the Chinese Federation's consulate, and so the whole thing kind of becomes a political mess because now he's a refugee under the Chinese Federation, but also at the same time the Britannians want to get him and everybody that's in there, and they come out with everyone that was imprisoned and basically do a hostage situation, like if you don't come out, we'll kill everybody one each hour, and the whole thing goes from there. That being said, we go through the first, second, and third episode until Lelouch actually gets to play around Lolo, because he finds out that Lolo has Geass, but at the first point that they actually fight one against the other, he doesn't actually get it, and also because he finds out that Lolo is psychologically gullible somewhat. It's kind of a stretch, and I will not really enter in the merit of whether what he does is actually alright, if it's really a stretch. I really think personally that they really force that plot point on just to get Lolo on the side of Lelouch without betraying him. And at the point that Lolo actually goes with Lelouch through a whole lot of bad lies and some plot points that are clearly like, he's lying, because we find out that the backstory that Lolo actually doesn't have a family and never has had a human experience, and the few months that he had those false memories with Lelouch, because Lelouch was implanted memories of Lolo, although those were not real, were the best months of his life. And so he has kind of developed this love for Lelouch, even though he knows that it is kind of fake and it is limited by time and stuff, but he gaslights himself into believing that it's okay and stuff. And Lelouch basically finds that out and plays into that. Add to that to the fact that in the fourth episode, when they actually go to save every one of the imprisoned guys, he kind of forces Lolo's hand into saving him and basically becoming a de facto traitor of Britannia, and so he cannot kind of show his face really, and the whole thing goes from there. After then they get rescued, we have an actual representation of C2 and Kalin as characters, more or less, to actually debate with Lelouch. Even better to the fact that C2 at the very start, and I don't think that I'm reading too much into it, but it's pretty clear in the way that they present it. But it is the first time the whole anime, this second season, when C2 comes to actually rescue Lelouch, she has become some kind of romantic interest, whereas in the first season she was clearly not. She has become some kind of romantic interest, and more than that, after the whole thing and Lelouch regains his memories and stuff, it is pretty clear that Kalin, after learning that Lelouch is Zero, has kind of started developing some kind of feelings for him too. And this goes on, they save everybody, and from then on the anime really gets going with the Black Knights now going on full throttle ahead, because then we learn that some of the members, like Daithato and Rakshasa, they went into hiding within the Chinese Federation. I'm pretty sure it's the Chinese Federation, I think. And from then on, the whole thing kind of goes from there. Then comes the 5th episode, where we have the rehash, more or less, let's say third year, if you may, school festival, where they try the whole thing about the giant pizza and stuff, while this is basically a filler episode for the most part. We see that the main objective for the Britannians against Lelouch is because they want mainly Lelouch to recover his memories so he can contact C2, because apparently C2 is part of their grand plan and stuff, and at this point we don't actually know why. But also they drop a huge bomb at the end of episode 5, where actually Nunnally is alive and captured by Britannia, and basically it's a whole ploy by Suzaku to basically test whether Lelouch has actually regained his memories, because he is suspicious already of him, and Lelouch kind of plays it out, kind of how can I say that, due to interference from Lolo, because his Geass is really hard to explain, but basically he freezes people on time, and by freezing Suzaku a bit for like 4 seconds, Lelouch just says to Nunnally through the phone, like, imagine that I don't know you, I will explain later, maybe, and I love you and stuff, and basically he plays it out okay. It's kind of a stretch, but still, and the whole thing kind of, again, it's one of the many stretches that they do in this season that I personally don't like. I think that it is kind of sloppy writing, because they are trying to bank on something that's really unrealistic, and considering that most of the people in this series are not idiots, like, they are intelligent people, you would think someone would catch on eventually. But then again, that's the way they chose to do it. Then from then on, we have episode 6. They basically present Nunnally to the public as the new viceroy for Area 11 or Japan, because the last one was basically killed in the first episode, so now they need a new viceroy. And to that, it is clearly an attack on Lelouch, and the whole thing kind of goes on from that perspective. So Lelouch starts to being kind of forced into action by that fact, and on episode 6 they go and try to invade the floater, the big airship that's carrying Nunnally from Britannia to Japan. They end up failing. Lelouch as Zero finally sees Nunnally for the first time in a year since he was separated from her, and in the last moments, so there's a big fight in the air and stuff. Suzaku appears because he's the appointed knight for Nunnally at this point, and there are other. And quick tangent here. So in the meantime that Lelouch has lost his memories, Suzaku has entered a special order of knights. That's the rounds in the table, something like the knights of the round, something of the round table, same to Arthurian legends and stuff. And he has become the, I think, Knight of 7, as the 7th most powerful knight in the whole of Britannia. And we have the introduction of the Knight of 6, that's Mordred. That's Anya, one of the, let's say, side characters that end up being really important for one reason that I'll talk a bit later, but still. And from then on, we have also the knight, I think the Knight of 10, that is Gino, that also is kind of a, let's say, big brother kind of figure for Suzaku for the most part. And also, in that same way, Suzaku has become way more ruthless in his ways of doing everything since everything that happened to him. So he's bearing the grudge against Yuffie towards Lelouch for 1 year now, and he cannot for the life of him actually end Lelouch because he's being ordered to, and he's trying to change the system from the inside and stuff. And the whole thing kind of develops in that way, in that you notice that Suzaku has had the most of development. It is a reflection of how he ended the first season, but at the same time he has come a long way off screen, and in many ways Lelouch for the most part has kind of neglected that fact that Suzaku is not the same Suzaku that he used to know. So Suzaku, although he still tries to run by the rules, he from time to time will play dirty on some stuff. He will be somewhat cruel, somewhat ruthless. In some instances, there is a special episode way later in the season that is especially shows both parts of Suzaku being really more ruthless than originally, and also being a bit more, let's say, forgiving to the fact that Lelouch has done what he's done to him and everyone else. But that's when I'll get there when we get there. So basically, episode 6, there's a big battle. It's one of the best, and I will say was one of the scenes that I actually got really excited by, because to this point on episode 6, none of the nightmares that the Black Knights use actually fly, and at this point every one of the Britannian main forces, that being Suzaku, Mordred, and Gino, I forgot the name for the mech of Gino, but anyways, all the round table guys, all of them have floater units or flying units, whatever, jetpacks or wings, and Kalin at this point and none of the 4 holy swords have any flying. But in this one episode, Kalin is basically beat up in the first round by Suzaku, and while falling, she receives her upgrades through C2 missile. So basically, in the meantime, somehow the Black Knights have acquired a fucking military submarine with rocket silos and stuff, and so they just launch the upgrades through the air and align it, and it all builds in the middle of the fall, and when she comes like flying over, it's really nice. It's a really well done scene in that way. I really thought episode 6 was really nice. It ends up with Suzaku basically saving Nunnally from Zero, and also Kalin dragging the Zero out of the floater before it explodes. Ends up with nothing happening really. They go back to Japan, everything goes according to the whole thing. So episode 7, we have the inauguration of Nunnally as the Viceroy, and from the get-go she exclaims that she wants to redo what Yuffie tried to start, that is the special control zone of Japan, inside of Japan. I know that it doesn't work the name, but that's it. And the whole thing kind of really sounds the same, like, oh my god, are they actually going to try this whole thing again? The first time didn't end up well to no one involved, so what the fuck are we actually on about? And when this comes up, everybody in the Black Knights are like, holy shit, we're not falling for this. And then Zero appears like, yeah, we're falling for this because I have a plan. And he didn't like really explain to us audience, but it's clear from the get-go that he has a really weird plan. And I would just say that the way that they do it, I know it doesn't make any sense. It's really like, holy shit, man, it's unpractical as fuck, but oh my god, it's a really interesting scene to see, because it comes down to the fact that Suzaku is forced to basically stop anyone from shooting innocent people, but he also wants to shoot everybody because it's clearly bullshit, because the plan is bullshit, but politically it is not wrong, and it becomes weird, and it is a stretch, but it's something that I'm willing to forgive, because it was such out of the box solution that I would just say, yeah, that's fine. It's funny. It actually becomes kind of funny. And through this bullshit solution, that I will not discuss the bullshit solution because, oh my god, come on. They basically get, let's say, a loan of land from the Chinese Federation and kind of begin to rebuild Japan with everybody that they could take from Area 11. And so from then on, we can assume that Area 11 is mostly Britannians and a really small part is Japanese people from this point forward. But that doesn't actually come up before we waste one whole episode, basically episode 7, with Lelouch basically crashing out, because at first when the news come that Nunnally is going to remake the whole thing about the special control zone and stuff, he basically says, okay, now that it's not Yuffie and I'm not involved really, everybody will be okay, I don't have a role to play anymore and stuff. And then he kind of gets a real reality check first from Kalin, then from his friends somehow, and then from C2 that is the one that actually does the reality checks, all things considered. He has a little crash out, then he remembers that, oh yeah, this has become a bit bigger than Nunnally and me. I am on the pathway to destroy Britannia and so on and so forth. And the whole thing kind of develops in a way that they go do that, they come to the Chinese Federation stuff, but then the next episode already we have a whole lot of more scheming to come up. So we have the reintroduction of Shinaizo as the main antagonist for the season for the most part, and he stays alive way too long, if I'm being completely honest. I don't know how they managed to not kill him before, but either way. So Shinaizo has basically being reintroduced as the most scheming of the Britannian princes, and in the meantime we find out that this is a side thing, but it becomes kind of important here, that the Chinese Federation is governed by basically an empress that is for the most part the symbol of the government, and then a whole council. I don't know how to pronounce. I think it's Eunchuns. I don't actually know how do you pronounce that, but it's basically a council of basically old men at this point, because the whole thing kind of is pretty messed up, because the empress is like really young. So and she's basically best friends with Kaguya. That's one of the members of the kind of Black Knights, because she's politically important in Japan and stuff. But saying aside, the thing is, they try to marry the Eons, the council tries to marry the empress to Odysseus, I think is the name, the first prince of Britannia, that is the oldest brother of Lelouch, just so they can have control over the area that Japan has taken as a loan. And the whole thing kind of comes out that the Eons basically sold out the prince, the empress, and the country itself to Britannia in order to become part of Britannian royalty and stuff. And then we find out that in the midst of that, there was already a coup d'etat planned by one part of the Chinese Federation, and so they start the coup d'etat at the same time that the guys are trying to politically marry the empress to Britannia. And when that whole thing happens, the Black Knights come out, grab the empress as a hostage, and says, fuck you all, we're getting out of here. And then there's this huge chase. The guys from the coup d'etat are basically stopped by the main forces and the Britannian forces also. The Eons basically force the guys from the coup d'etat to actually work for them to recapture the princes and destroy the Black Knights. It ends up that it doesn't actually work all that well, because the whole thing kind of becomes a mess, and it's a huge stretched fight, and the whole of the Black Knights are there, and the whole Britannian, let's say most of the army is there, and the things exploding and Chinese being involved in the middle. The thing ends up with Kalin being captured by the Britannians due to her battery basically running out. They can actually secure the Empress of the Chinese Federation, kill all the Eons that try to sell her out, and basically create a pact with the Chinese Federation to fight Britannia. And then we get to the end of the first part of the second season. With this whole thing about the Chinese Federation being kind of done, we find, the first indication that something's about to happen, because 13 episodes into an anime, you know that they need to actually put up some drama. And in that manner, Lelouch calls up Sherry because he needs relationship advice, because after saving, and this is kind of in bad tone, but at the same time kind of makes sense, after rescuing the Empress of the Chinese Federation, they want to actually politically marry her to someone Japanese, so it kind of represents a connection between the two nations. And while most of the people are really against it, Lelouch comes in the middle, kind of being awkward as he is. He doesn't know what really to say. He calls up Shadi. She gives her advice to him, and ends up that nothing really happens, though it's a pretty cute kind of scene. Then we have, I would say, what would be a real bad filler about the last day of school for the student council president, Miri, because it's a whole mess about trying to actually put Lelouch and Sherry together at the end of her tenure as this student council president, and the whole thing is a mess. It's a huge filler that doesn't really make any difference in the story whatsoever, though it does raise a kind of a red flag, because after that we have one episode where Sherry is basically just strolling around and stuff, and for one reason or another we find out that one of the first, let's say, antagonists that we saw in the whole anime, the one that they call Orange, I don't remember his name right now, sorry, he comes back as a cyborg reconstructed by what they call the Geass order, or the order, to be simple, to basically kill Zero, and he has a Geass counselor. So he basically has an area of effect that cancels any Geass, which then, by coincidence, Shari is kind of walking kind of close to him, and he activates it. She remembers everything that happened, because both Geass, both Lelouch and the Emperor's, because it is something that I didn't actually mention right now, but the Emperor has messed up with everybody's memories inside of the student council and most of the school. Not only that, but actually Nina is now working with the Britannians to create a nuke, but that comes later in the story. But she's already being reintroduced when the Chinese Federation stuff already happened. But anyways, the thing is, Shadi regains all her memories from everything, and in doing that, she was reigniting her love by Lelouch, but at the same time, she was now confronted with her old feelings, because he basically killed her father by collateral, let's say, and it becomes a mess. She at one point seems like she will tell Suzaku about it, because she doesn't actually know that he knows, and the whole thing kind of goes like that. But in the midst of that, they come to a weird situation where they save her from basically unaliving herself, and from that point on she becomes kind of more okay with it, and she forgives him and stuff. But at the same time, when Orange is basically closing into Lelouch and almost catching him, she chooses to fight, and this is the same thing that happened in the first season, where she sticks her nose where she doesn't have any place in. And for the first half, let's say, of the whole situation, not the half of the episode, but for the first half of the whole situation, it's okay. We find out that actually Orange, after knowing that Zero is Lelouch, he has fell into his loyalty to the crown, and so by seeing that Lelouch is someone that has a Geass and is the son of Marianne, because after all this time, all these episodes, we actually kind of get the idea that Marianne actually had a role to play in the whole Geass stuff and how the power was developed and everything else. After all this time, when Orange finds out that Lelouch is Zero, he swears his loyalty to Lelouch to the end, and now has become one of the good guys, although he has the Geass Chancellor and stuff. And in the meantime, Lolo and Sherry are we'll find Lelouch and save him and stuff and whatever. And then Shelly mentions Nunnery to Lolo, and Lolo, being kind of a psychopath and wanted to have, let's say, his big brother only to himself, does the one thing that at this point in the story would think would happen. He kills Shelly. And then Lelouch has another crash out, and let's say the first part of the second season ends in that terrible ending, really. It was so free of a kill. I know that she raised a lot of red flags, but at that point I just thought, yeah, they're not going to kill her, I think, because it seemed pretty okay. It doesn't seem like it will happen, maybe. And then she mentions Nunnery, and then all the things are all the expectations are over. The cat's out of the bag. He stabs her in the abdomen, and yeah, that's how it ends. Then the whole thing kind of goes from there. Suzaku basically gets the idea that Lelouch has really regained his memories, though he cannot prove it yet, and we go on operating like that. Mind you, again, we don't have Karin. We have not had Karin for the last 4 episodes or so, and so this whole thing kind of becomes really weird. And then we come to what, in my opinion, is the worst episode in this whole season. That is episode 14, where so many threads are going on, and so much shit's happening on the screen that you cannot keep up with everything. So we have the funeral for Shelly, then Lelouch crashes out again, even though C2's within, he just crashes out. We then have, let's say, a few flashbacks explaining the connection between the Emperor and V2. V2 is basically C2, but it's another, like, clone or something. He's actually the second, what I would say, code bearer, something like that. And he's the director of the Order, the ones that developed Orange into being an assassin and stuff. And so the whole thing kind of goes like, Lelouch wants revenge to Sherry and to this Geass power that he curses so much. And so he wants to go find the Order, kill everyone, destroy everything, and in the meantime kill Lolo because he implanted a bomb inside of Lolo's nightmare. Add to that the fact that for one reason or another, from out of nowhere, Daihatsu has become suspicious of Ogi because for one reason or another he has noticed that Ogi has a connection to Violetta. And then add to that a whole nother thread happening on the school, Lelouch ordering everybody from the Black Knights to kill innocent people, basically unarmed people at the very least, and out of nowhere Cornelia reappears and for no real reason. Like, what the fuck? I thought was that, like, the last time we saw Cornelia, she was clearly near death, like really, really injured and stuff. And somehow, someway, she has deserted the Empire, she has become rogue and found the Order by some miracle. I don't know. Then, at the end of this episode, we find out that actually V2 as C2 used to be immortal, though he has passed his code, what they call the code, to the Emperor, and now the Emperor is immortal, and now by the end of episode 14, Lelouch has to basically face the Emperor head on, though he cannot kill him, and through some real weird meta bullshit, they kinda explain the idea behind it more or less, and C2 de facto betrays Lelouch in a way to actually get her objective that we find out is actually to end her own life because she's been living since medieval times, and so she wants just to end it because she doesn't actually see value in her life. But at the last moment she actually kind of learns that living is for the now, and so the whole thing kind of becomes this really uplifting message. At the same time, it doesn't really make sense because the whole rest of the explanation becomes really meta, and then we have this mini arc where everything about the Emperor and the whole thing about Geass will be resolved. By the end of it all, this interaction with the Emperor, so Lelouch has entered that weird dimension that the Emperor usually enters, where it's just the floating platform with the Greek architecture stuff. They talk a bit, he tries to shoot the Emperor, doesn't kill him. He tries to take the code from C2 to herself, and then Lelouch impedes the Emperor for doing that at the last moment because she basically gives up, and both of them go back to the normal world because apparently it's a pocket dimension or of some kind, and somehow, some way she regresses from her usual self to the one that he saw first in her memories. That is the first state where before she earned her own gears, and the whole thing kind of goes from there. So we have a few episodes of C2 being this really innocent, really cute in a way girl, and it's really jarring at the same time. Like, this is not C2, you know. It's like, oh my god, what the fuck's happened? And in the meantime, the guys from Japan and the Chinese Federation, and other countries not mentioned, they begin this UFN, so United Federation of Nations, something like that. And long story short, they declare war on Britannia through the Black Knights. And so the Black Knights go to attack Britannia, two fronts. And from then on, the whole mess kind of starts. So Karen is still imprisoned inside of Britannian prison in the government bureau in Tokyo. She eventually talks to Nanari and stuff, and we get some real nice fights between Karen and the other guys from the Black Knights with Suzaku and the guys from the Round Table. And as a flag of things that should not be in the battlefield, Nina installs a weapon in Suzaku's nightmare that has the nuke, which clearly will not have bad repercussions, clearly. Add to that the fact that Lelouch crashes out again in the middle of everything because the Emperor hijacks his transmission to the rest of the world, and the whole thing kind of when he was going to have his massive political move into being a force to oppose Britannia, he becomes a laughingstock because he's interrupted and hacked by the Britannians, and now we don't have C2 to reality check him, so it's just a crash out. It's pretty sad to watch. And then we come to the point that someone has the brilliant idea to say to Zaku, yeah, go to fight and take the nuke with you. You may need it. He fights, nearly loses, and then the Geass from Lelouch from that episode in the first season comes back to bite everybody's ass, and he, thinking that it would save him, fires the nuke towards the government barrel where Nanali is, and the whole thing kind of happens, and now Lelouch is basically destroyed. Like, he's distraught, absolutely, like, fucked. And to pile on more, for some reason, I mean, not for some reason, but one of the guys from the Black Knights actually reports to everybody that the operation against the order was not on the books, and so Lelouch pushed everybody to do it outside of the normal chain of command by his own whim, and they basically killed a lot of civilians, and so he's not to be trusted. And then the whole thing piles on to the point that eventually Shinaizo appears to talk, just to talk. He does not get shot, unfortunately, and basically spoils everyone on everything about Geass, about Lelouch being Britannian, and about the whole thing kind of being played by him. And he kind of gets it together after he understands the fact that he's going to die, and he's ready to die at that point. But then Lolo, in an act of, I would say, heroism, but also clear like stupidity, he chooses to save Lelouch because he's his older brother. And even though Lelouch clearly says that he hates him, he wanted to kill him and stuff, Lolo doesn't really care. He saves Lelouch, and then Lelouch goes to the same island that they had the confrontation the first season to face down the Emperor and save everybody and do everything. And Lolo dies in the meantime also. And meanwhile this all is happening, Suzaku is having a bit of a fit because he notices that his methods are becoming way too ruthless for himself, and he tries to basically get a confession of Kalin by using, let's say, truth serum. And then he notices that he's using the same methods that Lelouch uses, and then the whole thing kind of goes from there. And then he goes like, well, okay, time to breathe, time to rethink my actions. And add to that the fact that now Lelouch is AWOL, basically, and everybody's against him. He enters the pocket dimension again to fight the Emperor, though he kind of tries to destroy the portal and just like lock everybody inside, so he and the Emperor are locked inside forever. But then for some reason, out of nowhere, because the story needed someone to save it, Anya, the pilot of Mordred, she basically activates a weird type of Geass that is, let's say, the persona of Marianne, or Lelouch's mother. She comes up, grabs C2, somehow, some way, connects to C2 in a deeper, like, mind level, re-unlocks her normal personality, and says, oh, yeah, we need to go there now to do the plan. And then they have this whole explanation about the whole thing being, and it's really hard to explain this, but trying to be real simple with everything. The plan was basically to erase misunderstandings from the world. They call erasing lies, but it would be the convergence of all communications, and nobody would misunderstand anymore, and the intentions would be true and everybody would be honest, which then comes back to the fact that Tower of Babel, the whole thing about everybody understanding each other and the whole stuff, and the symbology of them constructing let's say some kind of Tower of Babel to reignite the understanding between humans. But then the way that they would do it would be to erase everybody's individuality and the desire and will to actually live and do stuff. And so the whole thing kind of comes down to the fact that just as a tangent really quickly, so Mariana has a real quick explanation on a flashback of how the fuck she's still alive and inside of Anya's body, because apparently Anya was living with them back when they were attacked, and Mariana has had the gears of imprinting her personality inside of people and becoming kind of dormant, but also being able to activate whenever she wanted. And when she enters the pocket dimension kit, she can be herself and not really push Anya to actually enter. And then we have this whole explanation that the whole plan was first concocted by V2 and the Emperor, because they are actually brothers, but V2, by gaining the code, was immortal, and so he was forever young, and while the Emperor has actually become the Emperor and being old. But then V2 noticed that because of Mariana, the Emperor had changed and twisted the original plan in his vision, and that's why he planned to attack Marianne to then kill her and rid the Emperor of her. But then after the attack, the Emperor, to protect both Lelouch and Nanari, he implanted the fake memory that they were attacked and it was his fault, because then they would resent him and not know about the plan, and at the same time they would be protected in Japan where nobody would find them because he didn't want V2 to go after them. And that's all to say that they had the big ass plan to actually construct this Tower of Babel, let's say, to actually erase the misunderstanding, though they would not let anyone have the desire to do anything anymore. And in hearing that, Suzaku, who has been dragged inside of the whole this pocket dimension, Lelouch and C2 come against them, and somehow, some way, they are erased by what they call God, that is the group unconsciousness of the universe, which is a really bad meta explanation of what the fuck they were doing. But the whole thing ends up that both the Emperor and Marianne have been killed in a way by Lelouch, so he killed his own mother and father. And now with that, that's the end of, let's say, the Emperor arc. Now Sitsu's back to normal, Lelouch is back to normal, and Suzaku is, let's say, a bit more understanding of the whole thing. And this is where we come to the final arc of the anime that I like to call Lelouch against the world. So basically, now that Suzaku is more or less understanding of the stuff, and Lelouch has basically, to this point, thought that Nanani was dead and everything was kind of resolved for the most part, Lelouch has the brilliant idea of taking over Britannia, and so he does, and enlists Suzaku with a really over the top plan. But then he takes over Britannia, and then there's this whole huge fight. So basically, he takes over Britannia, and he starts to actually do some nice stuff. He liberates a lot of areas. He actually liberates Japan for first, but then a lot of other things that happen. And then he tries to join the UFN, and everybody's kind of really spooked when he tries to do it, because when he does, everybody tries to close him in a vet, so he cannot use his gears on anybody. But nobody else besides the guys from the Black Knights know this, and the one that's presiding the voting for him for Britannia to actually join the UFN is Kaguya, who actually knows about the gears, and the whole thing kind of goes out of proportion, because then Suzaku appears, wrecks the vet, and the whole meeting is kind of done, and randomly there's a hostile takeover of the pooling because he wants to be inside of the UFN, but they won't let him. And the whole thing's kind of really hard because Kaguya, throughout the series, she's a side character, but still, she has mentioned multiple times that she likes Lelouch when she doesn't know about Zero, and after she knows about Zero, and she knows about it and stuff, and she still likes him. But when he faces her, she turns around to not look into his eyes and not fall to the gears, and she's crying. It's a really small detail, but I think that the scene itself is pretty hard, pretty emblematic of the whole thing, of how a certain haze of his victory. And when that whole thing happens, Shinaizo reappears in a clandestine broadcast and says, oh, by the way, I took all the nukes inside of my floating fortress and I will be threatening everybody in the world, so please just give up. And then everybody that's not Britannia joins up with Shinaizo. And then now Lelouch has to finish his brother and regain all of the warheads, because the way that the plan that Shinaizo has is that if he threatens everybody with the potential of annihilation, nobody will ever fight again. That's the plan at the very least. I talked about when I was talking about the first season, I did talk about not being political, and I'll choose to keep it that way, so I will just leave it at that. The thing is, Shinaizo chooses the threaten everyone tactic and keep everybody in the Mexican standoff for the rest of their lives, which is not that nice and doesn't go with the vision that both Suzaku and Lelouch have, and so they go there to finish this off. There's this whole battle, they go through a whole lot of stuff and a whole lot of things between Lelouch having to use Geass on every one of the soldiers to keep them in line to do what can only be described as a human sacrifice. And basically it's I don't know if it's a real thing, but it is kind of a nod to Star Wars in a way, that the whole kind of you need to go between the lasers and stuff, because if you get caught you will die and the whole thing. I mean, Star Wars was not the first one that did it, but I think it's one of the main perpetrators of this kind of scene, kind of situation. That being said, they go there, they enter the floating sky. We find out, unfortunately, and I don't actually remember where, but I was really pissed when this came up. But somehow, someway, in I don't know where, when, how, because the scene of her dying is, I would say, pretty certain, but they got away somehow, and Nunnally is alive and well and doing good. I was really pissed when it came up, because it really taught me something, right? At this point where we are at the end of the whole anime, like 5 episodes to go, and nobody of the main cast will die if they are not needed to. So, not needed to, but nobody of the main cast will die. No one. Absolutely no one. Not the guys from the Holy Sword, not the guys from the Round Table, not C2, not Kalin, not Suzaku, not even the antagonists. Shinaizo will not die, Cornelia will not die, nobody of the Black Knights will die, and the whole thing kind of goes from there. And this really got me pissed. I will talk more about this a bit later, but still. Then they go there, they don't actually fight Shinaizo, but they find out that he actually gave the key to the launch. Basically, they gave the red button to launch the nukes through Nunnally because she asked it to, and now he has to outplay Shinaizo in his own game, and they end up kind of doing that. That Haruto dies in the process. I mean, I will not say finally, but he was starting to get a bit too over himself, let's say. Then he dies, Lelouch uses the Geass on Shinaizo. From then on, it's basically game over. Everybody loses. And now the worst man in history has the most power in the world. And then we have a flash forward for 2 months. I think 2 months, 1 month maybe. And now Lelouch is parading in the middle of Japan with everybody that's imprisoned. So Shinaizo, everybody from the Black Knights, and especially Nunnally right in front of him. Pretty fitting, let's say. And Nunnally, especially, her attire is not that helpful if you think about it. Like she's cuffed, but most of the straps that she has on her attire in that one occasion that don't do anything. I don't get it, but it's still minor detail. And then the whole plan comes to fruition when Lelouch is parading, and in the horizon Zero appears, grabs a sword, jumps through his security guards, his knights, everyone, and stabs him right in the heart. And in a really symbolic way, Lelouch falls over the Britannian flag, bleeds all over it, and in his final moments somehow has the weird connection that C2 has with other people that she contracts the Geass to, and gives Nanari the vision. And at this point also, one of the things that really like, what the fuck, Nanari regains her vision at the very, very end of the whole fight, but still gives her the vision of his memories, and basically flashbacks explains everything that he done, everything that was his intentions, and then she starts crying, and the only person crying the whole scene is her. Everybody else is commemorating the death of a tyrant. And who is the one inside of the Zero Mask? It's Suzaku. Pretty fitting. I think that the ending is pretty good, but this season was not. I will get to that. So, to get my opinion out and actually finish this up. First things first. I like the ending. I think the ending is really fitting. I really think that at the end of the day, after everything that happens, even after I think one of the most important scenes, that is the confrontation between Lelouch and Nanari, I think the ending is really, really well done. The fact that he chose, I think a lot of people had the same idea on becoming the villain, and so sacrificing themselves. I think that in that way, both Shinaizo and Lelouch had the same idea, but Lelouch is shown to be the better character, because at the end of the day, Shinaizo doesn't actually want to sacrifice himself. He doesn't have the goal to actually dominate, to actually conquer. And in that same manner, I think that it is pretty fitting that at the end of the day, after everything that they went through, Lelouch and Suzaku actually made up somehow. Even though they ended the story hating each other, they came up in a way to actually work as a team and make a better future. Though that being said, with all of those rich words and actually having a real deal, like ending, a happy ending, all things considered, I think that in many ways this season lacked a lot of the finesse that the original had. The first season, I think, had a whole lot of more. They took their own time with doing stuff, from the battles to the strategic presentation to the explanations of everything and so on and so forth. I think that it is something that the second season lacked. I have a strong opinion from the bottom of my heart that it feels like this season was rushed from the start. Although we can see that both Suzaku and Lelouch are way more ruthless in their ways of doing stuff, I think that a lot of the fighting, a lot of the ongoing of the season in general was just tied up by random mecha fights, and not really the strategic manner that the first season had. I think that in many ways it shows a whole lot more of the weak part of Lelouch when he crashes out a lot in the season, and how much he doesn't actually get real closure, real happy closure at the very least, because although he does create the word that he wanted for Nanari, he doesn't actually take part in it. In that way, I think also that a whole lot of other characters didn't actually have the closure that they deserved in many ways. There is a bit in the final episode where they have a 2-month skip, and just to show where everybody is, which I think is pretty cute in many ways. I think that for the most part, all of the characters had a good, like, happy ending, but at the same time, I don't think that the way that we got here was that great. I think that a whole lot of the dialogue was way too rushed. I think that a whole lot of arcs wanted more time to develop and actually go the places they wanted, to actually give the explanations they wanted. I don't think that the studio was afforded that luxury of time that they had in the first season. In many ways, I think that they would have benefited if they had another season, because then we could have more of those more strategic mecha battles, more showing off the evolution of everyone. I think that, and this is the part that really broke my heart, is that at the end of the day, when even the Black Knights turn against Lelouch, I think it was really hard to watch in in general, because all things considered, even though he is returning and stuff, they could not forgive him, even though he did everything for them. And in many ways, it really gets me kind of pissed, the fact that if it was not by the fact that Shinaizo had the nukes in his power, probably Lelouch would have won everything and not even better than I, because him plus Suzaku would be like unbeatable for the most part, even with Kal and the other people actually fighting against him. I don't think that they would lose, and in many ways I think that many of the explanations are left like unturned. So what's the basis of the Geass? They never really touched on it. Where, I mean, they say where V2 and C2 came from, but they don't actually like say why there are two codes and not only one. How did V2 actually get his code, whereas C2 we have the whole explanation, and for the most part that's a plot hole that they leave unturned. Not only that, but also I think that the explanation for the whole Emperor plan about the leading god and stuff was really out there. I don't think I get it even now after watching it, because it was just so meta, just so what the fuck. And I think that a lot of the discussions that come up between Lelouch and C2 in many ways, they end up being this kind of wordplay, kind of meta stuff about living as an experience or to gather more knowledge and stuff, and it really doesn't really push out something nice. Like at the end of the day, you don't get the message because the dialogue is so messy, and at the same time it really does not help that the whole thing is trying to move a Mach 5 every time. Like no episode has only one thread going. Every episode we need to have the Black Knights, then cut up to the school, then cut up to Kalin being imprisoned, then cut up to Suzaku doing whatever, and it always keeps on going with this messy way. It really didn't feel good to me, and that's the main problem I have with the season. The season itself I don't think it was well paced. The ending is good, but the season is not well paced, which is different from the normal stuff that I complain here, because for the most part, any other anime that I watch, I like the season, but I hate the ending. This is not the one. I'm not saying like it. I really like the ending. I think the ending is fitting. I think the ending is justifiable, though I don't really get the ongoings of the rest of the season. I think that the whole drama about him not recovering his memories is way stretched out. I think someone would have gotten up to it and actually put him against the wall and actually got the real answer out of him. I don't think that it could have gone as long as it did. I think Nanali being alive at the end of the day, I don't like the way they did it, because the scene was pretty certain, pretty decisive about the fact that she was caught in the nuke, and when she shows up again, I was like, they just wrote her back in the story because they wanted to, because it's shock value. That and the fact that she recovers her vision in the later stages of the fight. If she recovers her vision, why didn't she recover her like movements? I know that hypertrophy is a thing and stuff, but anyways, the thing is, if she could overcome the gears of her father out of sheer will, I would think that she could actually try to walk by herself. And I think that her returning her vision was just a shock value for the audience itself, because it is the first time that she actually looks at Lelouch after 8 years of being blind, and the one moment that she actually looks at him, she never smiles, and that's the underline I think that they wanted to push forward, but at the same time I don't think they needed it, more or less. In general, I would compare this whole thing. So it's not the same time frame. I know this is way older than this, but this is the same problem I have with Darling in the Franxx. I would have loved this anime if they killed the Emperor and that was the ending. I would be a-okay with that. But then they do the Emperor stuff, and then you need to actually build a whole another 2 arcs to actually go there, betray Lelouch with the Black Knights, and then after all that he goes against everyone in the world to then become the villain and die. I don't agree with that. I think that if you just kept at the Emperor it would have been really okay. I think the Emperor in many ways is the weakest of the villains. I think Shinaizo in many ways does a way better job as the villain because he is an actual motherfucker. It really would have been better if he just killed him, but the Emperor is so weak as a villain because we never actually get to see him be villainous in many ways. I think there is only one instance when he alters everybody's memories, but at the same time, it shouldn't be just that. He many times he shows that he does not care about the war. He does not care about anything, and that just goes to show the audience that he's not really the one that you're fighting. He's not important at the end of the day, because if he's not the one controlling the troops, it doesn't really feel like he's fighting against you. In many times he mentions that he does not care about mundane things such as war, and that just deconstructs the villain itself. It doesn't really feel like the villain anymore. And that really annoys me. Now, talking about a bit of let's say the better parts of this all, I really liked the first opening of the season. I don't have the name here, but I will get there when this episode comes out. Really like the first opening. The second opening I don't really like, but I have not listened to it much because the parts where it appears, I would rather skip the intro to watch whatever the fuck was happening, so I can't really give an opinion on that. A quick shout out, after Karen is captured, the same Earl of Pudding that made the Lancelot of Suzaku, basically he messes around with the Guren, and Guren's last form, and here's a failure of me. I don't know what Guren relates to, what it refers to, but the design really reminded me of Guren from Gurren Lagann. I felt it was so funny, oh my god, they actually did a reference. It was really good, and in many ways I really like this anime. I think the first season was way stronger than the second one, and that's the main thing on my opinion. I think the first season was way stronger in pacing, in plot no, but in pacing, in stakes, in presenting drama was way better because the drama was justified and nobody had actual plot shoot for the most part. And again, I just need to mention this again. I think that Charlie was done dirty because it was the cheapest death that you could have thought of. It was just there's this term that some people use when talking about plots and stuff that's called fridging, because it's related to really old Green Lantern timeline story where he gets the girlfriend and the next chapter she's dead and put on a fridge by the villain, and so basically she's just introduced just to die. And in many ways I think the reintroduction of Shari in having the gears over her cancelled and then she remembers everything, this whole build up that they do with her is just so she can die and be basically a font of depression for Lelouch, which I don't condone. I think it's really cheap as a plot device, and in many ways I don't think that they needed to actually do it. I really think that in many ways it would have been, let's say, a more okay way to do it if she followed on being a normal student until one point where she actually sees him close and then remembers the whole thing. But so is life. I don't know. But before I even start to ramble more than that, let's finish it here. So that's about it. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for watching. Please like, please share, please follow, depending on the platform you're in. And I hope you stick around for next time. Bye.